The room smelled like polished wood and champagne dreams, the kind of scent people wear when they're pretending they've earned everything. I stood at the back of the hall, watching my family smile beneath the chandeliers. My father, Martin Carver, in his crisp navy suit, my older brother, Nathan, leaning casually at the podium, my sister, Ava. All charm and posture. And at the center of it all, the banner that made my stomach twist, Carver & Sons Antiques, Legacy Auction. Presented by Morton and Field Estate House. Legacy. They'd even stolen the word. The auctioneer, a thin man with silver hair and a voice sharp enough to cut glass, tapped his gavel once. Ladies and gentlemen, today we honor 70 years of craftsmanship and heritage. The Carver family has decided to entrust their collection, and their business, to the open market. A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. My palms went cold. Because until that sentence, I hadn't known they were selling everything. I caught my father's eye across the room. He looked away too quickly. Nathan noticed me next, his smile flickered, then returned, polite, practiced. My sister turned, her voice low. You shouldn't be here, Liam. Why? I asked quietly. Because this is family business? Her jaw tightened. Because you're not part of it anymore. The gavel struck again. Applause followed. That was the sound of my entire life being auctioned off. I didn't storm out. I didn't shout. I just stood there, hands in my pockets, watching the betrayal unfold like a slow-motion car crash I'd already seen coming. People always mistook silence for weakness. They didn't understand it could also be camouflage. When the auctioneer introduced the first item, our grandfather's walnut desk, Nathan leaned into the microphone, grinning. This piece was hand-restored by our family's workshop, he said. A testament to our legacy of dedication and craft. I felt something inside me click, quiet but final. Legacy again. They loved that word. They just didn't love what it meant. I remembered the conversation 3 months earlier, the one that was supposed to bring the family closer. We'd been sitting around my father's kitchen table, the old clock ticking between us. The business is bleeding, Nathan had said. We need capital. I can fix it, I'd told them. I've got a buyer for the New Haven collection, and if we, Ava interrupted. We don't need your ideas, Liam. You're good with dust and polish. Let the adults handle the finances. My father hadn't defended me. He just rubbed his temples. You're too emotional about the shop? So. Because caring was weakness in their dictionary. That night, I walked out of the meeting certain of one thing, they were planning something without me. So I'd started planning, too. Back in the auction hall, item after item disappeared under the hammer, sold to strangers with glossy smiles. The crowd adored it. The Carvers looked like royalty. When the auctioneer reached the final lot, he lifted his gavel with ceremony. And last? The crown jewel of the Carver collection, Lot 47, the entire Carver & Sons Antiques property, inventory, and brand rights. We'll open bidding at $2 million. A gasp rippled through the audience. That was my mother's store. Her handwriting was still etched into the doorframe. I felt my heartbeat steady, not fast, not frantic. Just deliberate. Here's the thing about betrayal, it burns only if you don't see it coming. I'd seen it weeks ago, in the accountant's nervous glances, in Nathan's sudden business trips, in the lawyer's careful phrasing when I'd asked for updated ledgers. So while they'd been plotting my removal, I'd been signing papers. Quietly. Legally. Perfectly. The Carver & Sons Antiques property, my mother's section. The original store before it expanded, had been registered in my name since last month. A loophole buried in the founding deed. Which meant they weren't just selling me out tonight. They were selling something that no longer belonged to them. Do I hear 2 million? The auctioneer called. Hands shot up. 2.5. 3. My father beamed like a man who'd never lost a bet. I stepped forward slowly, my voice carrying clear across the room. Before you go higher, I said, you might want to check who actually owns what you're bidding on. Every head turned. The auctioneer blinked. Sir? This is a public sale, private property, I cut in. The Carver & Sons building and its original inventory were transferred to Liam Carver, that's me, 6 weeks ago. Here's the deed. I handed him the folder. He skimmed it. His face drained of color. The crowd erupted into murmurs. Cameras flashed. Nathan hissed. What the hell did you do? I smiled thinly. I listened. And I learned. My voice was calm, but every word hit like a nail being driven home. You wanted legacy, I said. Now you can have the part that was never ours to sell. My father stood frozen. The auctioneer cleared his throat. Ladies and gentlemen? Due to a discrepancy in ownership, Lot 47 is withdrawn from sale pending legal verification. The audience buzzed, half scandal, half thrill. A woman near the front whispered, That's his son, isn't it? Another murmured, the quiet one. The quiet one. Always. Nathan leaned in, furious. You've ruined us. No, I said. You did. I just stopped you from selling what wasn't yours. I turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. Here's a free appraisal, I said loudly enough for the microphones to catch. You can auction off antiques, but not integrity. That one's priceless, and you've been broke for years. A few people gasped. Someone actually clapped. That was the quote they printed the next morning, you can auction off antiques, but not integrity. Liam Carver. Outside, night air hit my face like water. I walked down the marble steps as the sound of commotion echoed behind me. I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. The revenge wasn't complete. This was just the opening bid. The night air outside Morton and Field tasted like electricity and perfume. Reporters swarmed like flies to honey, microphones flashing under the marble lights. Mr. Carver. Is it true you stopped the sale of your own family's business? Was this revenge or justice? Are you suing them? I kept walking. One camera flashed inches from my face, I didn't blink. Let them have their headlines. I'd already written the real story weeks ago. A black car pulled up to the curb, an old Lincoln Continental, polished but unassuming. My lawyer, Dana Wells, rolled down the window. Get in, she said. Before they eat you alive. Inside, the car smelled of leather and faint citrus. Dana drove like she talked, smooth, fast, decisive. She glanced at me. Well, that was one hell of a show. I didn't plan for it to go public tonight. She raised an eyebrow. Liam, you filed those transfer papers 3 weeks before your family filed their auction contract. You knew they'd find out. I knew, I said quietly. But I didn't expect them to do it like that. In front of everyone. You sound disappointed. I'm not. I looked out the window, watching the auction hall shrink behind us. I just didn't think betrayal would look so predictable. We drove in silence for a few minutes. The city lights flickered across my reflection, calm, unreadable. Dana finally said, you realize what happens next, right? Your father's lawyers will contest the deed. Your siblings will spin the press. They'll make you out to be ungrateful, unstable, they already did that years ago, I said. She sighed. You could have taken the quiet route? Liam. Sold your shares, walked away with a decent payout. I smiled faintly. Wolves don't walk away from sheep who keep calling them weak. When she dropped me at my apartment, she handed me a file. I finished the paperwork for Phase 2. The corporate filings are clean, and the holding company is ready. I nodded, taking it. Good. We'll move at dawn. Dana smirked. You make revenge sound like a real estate deal. It is. I'm just buying back what they stole, one piece at a time. My apartment was small, minimalist. No family photos, no clutter. Just maps, documents, and a corkboard pinned with names, properties, and timelines. The old Carver and Sons network, their suppliers, warehouses, distributors, all neatly drawn out like arteries on a body. 3 years ago, they'd pushed me out of the business because I lacked leadership. So I built my own company behind the scenes, Wolf Hollow Restorations. Anonymous at first. Then slowly, methodically, I began buying their clients. Their contracts. Their reputation. And tonight had just cut out their heart. I poured myself a drink and sat on the couch. The television played muted coverage of the auction scandal. My father's face filled the screen, pale, furious, standing at a podium outside Morton and Field. We are deeply disappointed by our son's actions, he said. The Carver family has always operated on trust and tradition. I almost laughed. Trust and tradition, that was their code for control and silence. The reporter continued, sources confirm that the property deed in question was legally transferred. As of this evening, ownership of the Carver and Son storefront belongs solely to Mr. Liam Carver. The anchor added, analysts predict a pending legal battle that could cost the Carvers millions. I turned off the TV. Millions wouldn't fix what they'd lost. Reputation was the only currency my family ever worshipped. My phone buzzed. Nathan, you think this is over? You humiliated Dad in front of everyone. You'll regret this. I stared at the message for a moment before replying, me, you sold our mother's legacy to strangers. Regret is yours to keep. He didn't respond. He wouldn't. Nathan never fought battles he couldn't win. The next morning, I walked into Wolf Hollow's small office, brick walls, morning light streaming through blinds. Coffee brewing in the background. My assistant, Jordan, looked up from his desk. It's all over the news. You're officially the black sheep who bit back. Catchy, I said. He handed me a folder. Here's the updated portfolio. We secured contracts with 3 of Carver and Son's biggest buyers overnight. They want to switch suppliers before the lawsuit starts. I flipped through the pages. Good. Let's make it easy for them. Jordan hesitated. You're sure you want to go this far? I met his gaze. They called me sentimental. Said I didn't understand business. I'm just teaching them the difference between price and value. At noon, the headlines changed. Carver legacy in crisis, investors pull out after auction scandal. The wolf emerges, son outsmarts family in public betrayal. The internet loved it, memes, think pieces, hashtags. People always root for the underdog. As long as the underdog bites back elegantly. That afternoon, my father called. I almost didn't answer. When I did, his voice was clipped, cold. You think you've won something? No, Dad, I said evenly. I reclaimed something. You embarrassed this family. You sold our family, I said. Big difference. He exhaled sharply. This isn't over, Liam. It never is, I said. But maybe that's the problem. And I hung up. That night, Dana called again. Your brother's lawyer just filed an injunction. They're contesting the sale. I expected that. But here's the twist, she said. You're not the only one playing long game. Nathan's pitching investors for a new company, Carver Legacy Group. He's trying to resurrect the brand under a different name. I smiled. Perfect. She frowned. Perfect? Yes, I said. Let him rebuild. Because the higher he climbs, the harder he'll fall when he realizes who's funding his comeback. Dana was quiet. You mean, yes. Wolf Hollow is his biggest investor. I ended the call, leaned back, and closed my eyes. My family thought they'd made me the black sheep. What they didn't realize was that black sheep grow up in the dark. And in the dark, they learn how to hunt shape by the time the lawsuits hit the courthouse. The world had already chosen its villain, and it wasn't me. The media had decided I was the quiet genius who outsmarted his own family. The Carvers, on the other hand, had become a walking cautionary tale about greed, pride, and public stupidity. It wasn't even noon before the Wall Street Ledger ran the headline, Carver Dynasty Crumbles, the son who knew the value of silence. I didn't ask for sympathy. I didn't need it. I had something better, leverage. 3 weeks later, I walked into the penthouse office of Caldwell Investments, pretending to be just another silent investor. Nathan sat across from a circle of venture capitalists, sleeves rolled up, pitch deck projected behind him. The presentation read, Carver Legacy Group, Restoring the Past. Rebuilding the Future. Same colors. Same tagline. Even the same font our mother used for the original logo. They were resurrecting the carcass of a brand they'd killed with greed. And they thought no one would notice. Gentlemen, Nathan said confidently. We're looking for $6 million in equity capital to relaunch our restoration line and modernize production. We've already secured 2 anchor investors who believe in the Carver name. I smiled faintly from the back of the room. I was both of them. Through 2 shell companies, Hollow Trust LLC and Silver Pine Partners, I had funneled just enough funding to become a silent majority stakeholder without showing my hand. By the time Nathan finished his pitch, I owned 51% of his reborn dream. When the meeting ended, he finally saw me. His expression faltered for a fraction of a second. Liam? Afternoon, I said calmly. Impressive pitch. What are you doing here? Watching my investment grow, I said. Or at least, making sure it doesn't implode prematurely. He blinked. You're, what? An investor, I said simply. Through intermediaries, of course. Congratulations. Brother, you've just made me your partner. The look on his face was priceless. I swear, he said, voice rising, if this is some twisted, relax, I cut in. I'm not here to ruin you. I'm here to help you rebuild. Properly. I let that sink in, let him taste the illusion of hope before I'd shatter it later. That evening, I received a call from my father. His voice was strained, brittle. I heard you're back in the company, he said. I never left, I replied. You think this stunt makes you powerful? No, Dad, I said quietly. It makes me accountable. Something you should have tried once. He exhaled heavily. Your mother would have hated what you've become. No, I said, and for once, I let the emotion in my throat show. She'd hate what you turned us into. I hung up before he could answer. The next morning? Nathan called a board meeting at the new Carver Legacy office, sleek glass panels, imported marble, corporate arrogance with fresh paint. He strutted in like a man who'd forgotten the ground under him was borrowed. All right, he said, addressing the room. Let's get one thing clear, I may have partners. But I'm the face of this company. No one undermines my authority. Not even family. I leaned back in my chair. Authority's a funny thing. It depends on who signs the paychecks. He glared. Meaning? Meaning, I said, sliding a folder across the table, that all major decisions now require majority approval. And you're looking at the majority. He flipped through the paperwork, his jaw tightening with each page. This can't be legal, he said finally. It's business, I said. You taught me that. Ava, ever the opportunist, tried to play peacemaker. Liam, maybe we can work together. This doesn't have to be a war. I finished for her. It already is. You just brought knives to a negotiation. She frowned. What do you want, then? Transparency, I said. Every transaction, every asset, every partner. And I want 10% of all profits directed toward a restoration fund, under my control. Nathan laughed bitterly. You think we'll agree to that? You already did, I said. You just didn't read the fine print on your funding agreements. Silence. I could almost hear the sound of their pride collapsing. Later that day, I stood by the office window, watching the city from 30 floors up. Dana called. So, the wolf walks among the flock, she said dryly. They don't even realize it yet, I said. They think I'm here for closure. I'm here for correction. What's next? Let them build, I said. The higher they climb, the more weight the truth will have when it drops. And the truth is? That their empire isn't reborn, it's repossessed. Over the next few months, I stayed silent in public but omnipresent behind the scenes. I redirected contracts to Wolf Hollow subsidiaries. I changed supplier agreements to favor my firms. I restructured the Carver Legacy Logistics Network so that every crate, shipment, and invoice ran through my channels. They didn't notice. Or maybe they did and thought they could outsmart me. Either way, I was patient. Wolves don't chase. They corner. By summer, the press had changed its tune again. Carver Legacy Revival, new ERA for old brand. Brothers reconcile for success. Let them think that. Appearances kept them predictable. At the celebratory gala, Nathan toasted to new beginnings. He raised his glass. To the Carvers, proof that even black sheep can come home. Everyone laughed. I smiled back. Glass raised. And proof that wolves run the family farm now. A few people laughed, not realizing it wasn't a joke. Later that night, as the crowd mingled, Ava cornered me near the balcony. Why are you really doing this? She asked. You already won. I'm not trying to win, I said. I'm trying to rebuild what you all burned down, but this time without the rot. She stared at me, eyes narrowing. You're turning into him, you know. Dad. I looked out over the city lights. No. I'm just making sure his kingdom finally falls into honest hands. Inside, the auctioneer from months ago was giving an interview. Smiling into the camera. The Carver brothers, he said, once a tale of betrayal, now a story of rebirth. I turned away before he finished. Rebirth was a nice word. But wolves don't get reborn. They just stop pretending to be sheep. Success is loud. Failure is quieter, like a drip in the ceiling that no one hears until the floor gives way. For the first few months, Carver Legacy Group looked unstoppable. Nathan strutted through TV interviews, Ava smiled for magazine spreads, my father's quotes appeared under headlines about forgiveness and forward motion. Behind them, the machinery I'd built purred beautifully, and bled them dry one invoice at a time. The first leak came through accounting. A missing shipment here, a delayed customs fee there. Each delay routed through one of Wolf Hollow's logistics partners, legally sound, contractually airtight. Nathan called an emergency meeting. The numbers don't add up, he said, slamming the report on the table. I kept my expression neutral. Then check your vendors. They're yours, he snapped. Technically, I said, sipping coffee. They're ours. Ava frowned. We're hemorrhaging cash, Nathan. Maybe we need to, no, he cut in. We just need better oversight. He was right about that. He just didn't realize I already had it. Over the next weeks, headlines began to shift again. Carver Legacy Group under audit for financial irregularities, the wolf stays silent AS brother defends brand I didn't comment. Silence was more powerful than denial, it let people imagine their own version of the truth. At home, the calls started. First from my father, short, angry bursts that ended before I could answer. Then from Ava, pleading, brittle. Liam, please, she said one night. You're killing us. No, I said softly. You're just choking on the lies you fed me. This isn't you. It's exactly me, I said. You just never cared enough to see it. By autumn, investors started backing out. The contracts I'd seeded with slow trigger clauses began to mature, each one giving Wolf Hollow the right to acquire failing assets for operational continuity. One by one. Their warehouses, their patents, even their website servers became mine. They still thought it was coincidence. They still believed they could spin their way out. And I still let them try. The boardroom smelled of desperation now. Burnt coffee, cheap perfume, and fear. Nathan slammed another stack of papers onto the table. "We're down 40%, he barked. "Someone's leaking clients." I looked up from my laptop. "Clients leave when trust does." He glared. "You think this is funny?" "I think it's inevitable," I said. Ava whispered, "We could merge with another firm. Salvage what's left." "Who'd take us?" Nathan snapped. "We're toxic." I closed my laptop slowly. "I would." They both froze. "You?" Nathan said. "Wolf Hollow could absorb Carver Legacy," I said evenly. "Keep the brand alive. Save face publicly. You'd still have positions. Just smaller ones." Nathan's face went red. "You planned this." I met his eyes. "You planned the auction." The silence between us was heavier than any gavel strike. That night, Ava showed up at my apartment. She looked exhausted, hair damp from rain. Makeup smudged. "Please tell me you're not doing this out of spite," she said. I poured her tea. "Spite fades. This is structure." "You've made your point." "Have I?" I asked quietly. "Because for years, every decision I made was treated like a mistake. Every idea dismissed because it came from me. Now you finally have to listen." She looked down. "Nathan's cracking. Dad's health is worse. You'll destroy him." I hesitated. For a second, the weight of what I was doing pressed against my ribs. Then I remembered standing at that auction. Watching them sell my mother's legacy like it was scrap wood. "I'm not destroying him," I said. "I'm dismantling the illusion that he built anything worth saving." By winter, the numbers spoke louder than I ever could. Carver Legacy's accounts froze. Their creditors called. Their employees started sending resumes to Wolf Hollow. And yet, I didn't gloat. There was no thrill, just the steady satisfaction of gravity doing its job. When you take away the scaffolding of pride, a lie always collapses under its own weight. Then came the irony. The same auctioneer, Morton and Field, announced a liquidation sale for Carver Legacy Group. The press called it poetic. I called it symmetrical. Nathan refused to attend. My father was in the hospital. Ava came alone, sitting in the front row, face pale but composed. When the auctioneer lifted his gavel, he looked right at me. "Ladies and gentlemen, our final lot today, the assets of Carver Legacy Group. Opening bid, 1 million. A whisper ran through the room. I raised my hand. 1 million. No one countered. The gavel fell. Sold, to Wolf Hollow Restorations. Afterward, Ava approached me in the empty hall. "You've become everything he said you weren't," she whispered. I turned to her. And what was that? Capable. For the first time, there was no bitterness in her voice. Just truth. Outside, cameras flashed again. A reporter shouted, "Mr. Carver, how does it feel to own your family's company outright?" I smiled faintly. "Let's just say," I replied, "the wolf finally came home." The quote was everywhere by morning. But in private, I felt something unexpected, a flicker of sadness. Not regret. Not guilt. Just the ache of knowing the story was over. I looked out my window at the city lights. The empire was mine now. The revenge complete. And yet, beneath it all, I could still hear my mother's voice in memory, soft, warning, human. "Don't just prove them wrong, Liam. Prove yourself right." Maybe that part was still unfinished. Silence has a strange weight once victory fills it. In the first weeks after the auction, the world called me ruthless, brilliant, cold-blooded. They weren't wrong. But they didn't see the other truth. That silence had stopped feeling like peace. It had started sounding like loss. I visited my father at the hospital 2 days after the sale. The nurses said he didn't want visitors, but I went anyway. When I walked in, he was sitting by the window, oxygen tube coiled like a leash. His eyes were on the city skyline, or maybe the past. He didn't look at me. "You came to watch me die?" "No," I said softly. "To see if you're still capable of living." He exhaled sharply, half laugh, half bitterness. "You think you've done something noble?" "I did something necessary." "By destroying your family?" I stepped closer. "You destroyed it when you sold it." "I just signed the paperwork." He turned, finally looking at me, his gaze sharp even through exhaustion. "You've become exactly what I feared." "No," I said. "I became what you created." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Only the hum of machines filled the room. When I finally left, his reflection stayed behind, smaller, diminished, but still defiant. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. At the office, Wolf Hollow was thriving. New contracts, new investors, new staff. Every piece of Carver's old network had found its way here. Efficiency had replaced nostalgia. Success had replaced sentiment. But something felt off. Jordan noticed it first. "You don't celebrate anymore," he said one morning. "You just manage." "I've spent years cleaning up their mess," I said. "Celebration feels premature." He leaned against the doorframe. "Or maybe you just don't know who you are without a fight." That hit harder than I wanted to admit. Ava started showing up at the old shop on weekends, the one I'd kept, restored, renamed Carver Hollow Studio. She'd help rearrange the antiques, clean the dust off the glass, sometimes sit quietly in the corner while I worked. One afternoon, she said, "Dad's selling the house. Says there's nothing left worth keeping." I kept my eyes on the cabinet I was restoring. "He's right." She hesitated. "He's also dying, Liam." I froze mid-motion. "How long?" "Doctors say months. Maybe less." I said nothing. "You could see him," she said. "Before it's too late." I set the tools down carefully. Too late was years ago. That night, I sat alone in the workshop, the scent of varnish and pine heavy in the air. The walls were lined with memories, the same furniture my mother once polished, the same counters where she taught me to measure patience with every brushstroke. I poured whiskey, stared at the old clock she loved, and whispered, "What would you think of me now?" The clock didn't answer. It just ticked, slow, steady, honest. A week later, I found out Ava had moved our father into hospice. She texted me once, "He still asks about you." I didn't respond. Because I didn't know which version of me he was asking for, the black sheep or the wolf. The press eventually lost interest. The Carvers faded into nostalgia. A case study in betrayal and branding. But inside me, something restless grew. I started waking before dawn, walking the empty streets, replaying every choice I'd made. Every lie I'd turned into justice. I'd won, yes. But at what cost? Dana called one morning. "You've built something incredible," she said. "You could expand internationally now. Branch out." "I don't know if I want to," I admitted. She paused. "Liam, what do you want?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. And realized I didn't have an answer. One night, I drove past the old Carver house. The gate was rusted. The windows dark. The porch light, the one Mom always kept on, was out. For the first time since I'd been called the black sheep. I felt the weight of the title. Because sheep, wolves, family, they were all just stories we told to justify the hurt we gave each other. The next morning? I called Ava. "Meet me at the hospice," I said. When I arrived, she was already there, red-eyed, clutching coffee. My father lay asleep, his breathing shallow. His hands thinner than I remembered. I sat beside him. He stirred, eyes flickering open. "You finally came," he whispered. "I had to," I said. "You still owe me an apology." He tried to smile. "You still think this is about business?" "It was never about business." He turned his head weakly toward me. "Then what was it about, Liam?" I looked at him, truly looked. And the answer came quietly. Being seen. He closed his eyes. And for the first time? He didn't argue. After he passed, the press didn't care. The world moved on. Only Ava and I attended the burial, no cameras, no speeches. Just wind and the sound of dirt hitting the coffin. When it was done, she touched my arm. "You did what you thought was right." "No," I said softly. "I did what they deserved. Not what I needed." She looked at me. "And what do you need?" "Maybe," I said, "to stop being right all the time." That night, I went back to the shop and turned the lights on. Dust floated in the air like ghosts. The shelves gleamed under the soft yellow glow. For the first time in months, I picked up a tool, not as a businessman, but as a craftsman again. I began restoring a small wooden chest, something simple, something real. Every scrape of the sandpaper felt like confession. Every stroke of polish like forgiveness. When I finished, I sat there, staring at my reflection in the lacquer. For once, I didn't see a wolf. I just saw a man learning how to build again, not to win, not to prove, but to live. Grief is quieter than revenge. It doesn't shout or strike. It just waits in the corners of the room until you finally stop moving. After my father's funeral, the world went on exactly as it had before, phones ringing. Deals closing, clocks ticking. But I didn't. I stayed at the old workshop for days, letting the silence swallow me whole. Ava started coming by more often. She'd bring food. Sometimes paperwork, sometimes just herself. We didn't talk much at first. But grief has a way of softening the air between people who've hated the same ghosts. One afternoon, she stood at the doorway, watching me restore an old grandfather clock. "You still do this by hand?" she asked. I nodded. "Machines rush things. The wood tells you how fast it wants to be healed." She smiled faintly. "You sound like Mom." That hit somewhere deep, a place I didn't realize still hurt. "Maybe I finally understand her," I said quietly. Ava started helping around the shop, dusting, cataloging, sketching designs for the front window. Once, as she rearranged a display, she said, "I used to think Mom favored you." "She didn't," I said. "She just saw something in me the rest of you didn't want to." "What was that?" "Patience." Ava laughed softly. "We called it stubbornness." "Same thing," I said. By summer, Carver Hollow Studio had become something different, not a business, but a refuge. Local artists dropped by. Old clients returned. The place smelled of sawdust and citrus oil again, like it used to when Mom was alive. Ava started an online account showcasing our restorations, and to my surprise, it went viral. People loved the stories behind the furniture, an heirloom brought back to life. History made whole again. And for once, the name Carver started meaning something good. One evening, as we closed the shop, Ava said, "You know, you could turn this into a foundation. Teach restoration. Pass it on." I frowned. "I'm not a teacher." "You already are," she said. "You just don't like hearing it." I thought about it. Maybe she was right. Maybe rebuilding didn't have to mean owning. Maybe it meant letting go. Weeks later, Dana dropped by unannounced, holding a legal folder and 2 cups of coffee. "Bad timing?" she asked. "Depends," I said. "Are we talking business or ghosts?" "Both." She set the folder down. "The Carver legacy case finally closed. You're the uncontested owner of everything, patents, name, trademarks, assets. It's officially yours." I nodded slowly. "And yet it feels like ashes." She studied me. "You wanted justice. You got it." "Justice," I said, "isn't the same as peace." "No," she said. "But sometimes it's how peace starts." After she left, I opened the old ledger I'd found among my father's papers. Inside were pages of debts, notes, and one line written in his shaky hand near the end: "Legacy isn't what we keep. It's what we fix before we're gone." For the first time in years, I realized he'd tried, in his own rigid, flawed way, to hold on to something real. He just didn't know how to love what he couldn't control. Maybe I wasn't so different after all. That night, Ava and I sat on the roof, wine bottles between us, the city glowing below. "You think he'd be proud?" she asked. I thought about it. Maybe. Or maybe pride's the wrong word. Maybe he'd just, finally see me. She nudged my shoulder. He'd see both of us. The silence between us was softer now, not empty, just settled. The next morning, I walked through the studio before opening. The sunlight streamed across the floors, landing on the old sign that once hung above the door, Carver and Sons Antiques. I'd kept it all this time, cracked, faded. Still bearing my mother's handwriting. I lifted it gently, brushed off the dust, and rehung it on the back wall. But I changed one thing. Underneath, I carved a new word. Reclaimed. Because that's what we were now. Not rebuilt. Not reborn. Reclaimed. Later that week, Ava surprised me with an invitation. A small art festival downtown wanted us to showcase restored pieces from the old Carver collection. "It's local," she said. "Modest, but real. The kind Mom would have loved." I agreed. We spent days preparing, sanding, polishing, laughing at our own exhaustion. It felt like childhood again, but better. When the festival opened, our booth drew crowds. Not because of the pieces, but because people were drawn to the story. The black sheep and the family he didn't destroy, he remade them. As the day wound down, a journalist approached us. "Mr. Carver," she said, "the last time you made headlines, it was for taking your family's empire apart. What's this new chapter called?" I smiled, glancing at Ava. "Restoration." She nodded. "He's learning it applies to people too." The journalist laughed, scribbled the quote, and moved on. Ava turned to me, smirking. "See? You're quotable again." "Maybe this one will age better," I said. That night, I walked home alone through the quiet streets. The air smelled like rain. The same way it did the night of the auction. But this time, I wasn't walking away from something, I was walking toward it. Toward the version of me my mother always believed could exist. The one who didn't just fight for legacy. The one who became it. I unlocked the shop door and stood there a moment before turning off the lights. The silence no longer felt heavy. It felt earned. Because I finally understood, being the black sheep never meant being lost. It meant refusing to blend in. And maybe that's what made me the wolf after all. Not what I destroyed, but what I learned to protect. The first knock came just as the rain started. It was a gray afternoon. The kind where the world feels paused between breaths. The shop smelled of varnish and lemon oil. The air hummed softly with the sound of rain against the windows. When I opened the door, a woman stood there, late 50s, trench coat, camera bag slung over her shoulder. Her eyes were sharp but kind. Like someone used to watching before speaking. "Mr. Carver?" she asked. Yes. She smiled faintly. You don't remember me, do you? I studied her face, familiar. But buried under years. Then it clicked. Mrs. Keller, I said slowly. You used to work with my mother. She nodded. In the old days? Before everything changed. She stepped inside, brushing raindrops from her coat. This place looks alive again. It's getting there. I saw your name in the paper, she said. Figured it was time to see what became of the boy who used to sit under the workbench and fix broken latches. I smiled. Still fixing things. Apparently. Her gaze drifted to the walls, to the old photographs and restored pieces. Your mother would have been proud. That simple sentence hit harder than any headline. We sat at the small table near the back, coffee between us. I have something for you, she said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a yellowed envelope. Sealed but weathered. Your mother gave this to me years ago. Told me to deliver it when you were ready. I frowned. Ready for what? She didn't say. Just smiled that knowing way of hers. She slid the envelope across the table. I think she trusted you'd figure it out. I stared at it for a long moment before taking it. The paper felt fragile, like it might disintegrate if I breathed too hard. After she left, I sat there for nearly an hour, just holding it. Then, slowly, I broke the seal. Inside was a single page, handwritten in my mother's looping script. Liam, if you're reading this, it means you've finally learned what strength really is. Not power. Not control. But stillness, the kind that doesn't need to prove itself anymore. Don't let our name end with bitterness. Build something worth remembering, even if it's small. Even if no one thanks you for it. Love, Mom. I read it 3 times before I could move. It didn't feel like forgiveness. It felt like instruction. And maybe that was better. The next morning, I drove to the edge of town, to a plot of land the family had owned for decades, an abandoned warehouse, half collapsed. Surrounded by overgrown weeds. It had once been Carver's first restoration site, back when my grandfather still believed in honest work before image. I stood there in the drizzle, imagining what it could be again. Not a business. Not an empire. Something simpler. Something true. By noon, I'd called the zoning office. By sunset, I'd bought it back in full. When I told Ava, she blinked. You're rebuilding the warehouse? Not rebuilding, I said. Reclaiming. I'm turning it into a workshop for local apprentices, restoration, design, craftsmanship. No shareholders, no boardrooms. She smiled softly. That sounds like her. It's the least I can do, I said. She'd call it the most. Over the next weeks, the project consumed me in a way revenge never had. I found volunteers, old artisans, retired carpenters, kids from trade schools. We cleaned, rebuilt, repaired. The place started to breathe again. Each day, the walls echoed with the sound of hammers and laughter instead of boardroom arguments. Ava handled the PR, small stories in local papers, no drama, no grandeur. The headline read, "The Black Sheep Builds Again, Liam Carver Restores More Than Wood." For once, I didn't cringe at the nickname. One afternoon, while repainting the entryway, I found a carved symbol under the old plaster, my mother's initials. Intertwined with my father's. Beneath them, barely visible, another set, mine. I laughed quietly. Even as a kid, I'd been claiming territory. Ava walked in just then. Saw what I was looking at, and smiled. She'd like this, she said. The 3 of you, together again, in wood. At least. Maybe that's the only place we ever fit. Or maybe, she said, it's proof we always did. As the building neared completion, we decided to host a small reopening, nothing fancy, just family, friends, and the workers who'd brought it back to life. The night before, I stayed late to finish the final restoration, my mother's old rocking chair. I polished it until the grain gleamed like honey, the air thick with memory. And then I sat in it, the floor creaking beneath me, and read her letter one more time. Stillness. I understood it now. Revenge had been motion, endless, consuming. Loud. Stillness was choosing not to keep the fire alive. And for the first time, I was tired of burning. The next day, the warehouse was full of light and laughter. Kids ran between tables stacked with tools, old craftsmen swapped stories. Ava gave a short speech about heritage made whole. I stayed in the back, watching, not wanting to make it about me. But people found me anyway, shaking my hand, thanking me. Not for destroying something. For building it again. As the evening wound down, Mrs. Keller returned. She walked straight up to me, eyes glinting. You did it, she said. Did what? Made peace with the ghosts. Maybe, I said. Or maybe I just gave them better furniture. She laughed softly. Your mother would have loved that. Before she left, She handed me a small frame, a photo of her and my mom in the old shop, both covered in sawdust, grinning. She wanted you to have this, too, Mrs. Keller said. I held it carefully. Thank you. After everyone left, I stood in the doorway of the restored warehouse. The sign above the entrance gleamed under the soft lights, Carver Restoration Workshop, EST 1952 reclaimed 2025. The rain had stopped. The air was clean, cool, full of quiet promise. For the first time, I didn't feel like a wolf or a black sheep. I just felt human. When I locked up for the night, I whispered into the silence, stillness. The word didn't echo. It settled. And maybe that was her answer. The morning of the grand opening broke clear and bright. The kind of day that made everything look freshly painted. The Carver Restoration Workshop sign gleamed in the early light. Ava was already there, dressed in her usual casual perfection, juggling phone calls and catering. Press at 10, ribbon cutting at noon, local news wants a soundbite, I groaned. Ava. We said small. She grinned. This is small. 2 local outlets, 1 regional blogger, and 1 national magazine who begged for an exclusive. Which one? She hesitated. Modern Legacy. I froze. That was the same magazine that had covered the auction 2 years ago, the one that called me the wolf who ate his own pack. No, I said. Absolutely not. Ava sighed. Liam, they're offering to feature the workshop. The workshop, not the scandal. You can control the story this time. I looked around, the clean tables, the humming tools, the smell of pine and polish. This place was built from forgiveness. Not spectacle. I don't need another headline, I said. I just need this to work. She smiled softly. Then show them what working looks like. By noon, the place was buzzing. Families, local press, students, even a few of our old clients. The mayor gave a short speech about the value of craftsmanship and community. I nodded politely through it, wishing I could sneak away to the back. Then I saw her, the Modern Legacy journalist, young, sharp-eyed, recorder in hand. Her badge read Emily Hart. She caught my gaze, offered a polite smile, and mouthed, 5 minutes? I didn't answer. 5 minutes could undo years. After the ceremony, she approached me near the old rocking chair, the one I'd restored in my mother's honor. Mr. Carver, she said, extending her hand. I promise I'm not here for gossip. Everyone who says that usually is, I said, shaking it anyway. I mean it, she replied. Your story's fascinating, not because of the scandal, but because you rebuilt something meaningful. People want to know how. I studied her. She didn't flinch under the silence. All right, I said. 5 minutes. We sat at a small table by the window, the sunlight catching dust motes in the air. She clicked on her recorder. So, why reopen under the family name after everything? Because it still means something, I said. Not to them, to me. She nodded. You could have started fresh. New name, clean slate. I smiled faintly. You don't clean history. You restore it. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. That's a good line. Don't make it a headline, I said. She chuckled. Fair enough. She asked about the apprentices, the restoration fund, the growing community classes. Then her tone softened. Your mother's legacy seems to guide a lot of this. Do you think she'd approve? I looked at the rocking chair. She taught me that fixing things takes patience. I didn't understand that until I broke almost everything. Emily paused the recorder. Can I ask you something off the record? Go ahead. Do you regret what you did to your family? I exhaled slowly. I regret how much it cost to finally be heard. She nodded, thoughtful. Would you do it again? Yes, I said. But slower. When the interview ended, she stood and said quietly, you know, you don't sound like the man they wrote about. I'm not, I said. He was temporary. She smiled. I'll make sure the world meets this version instead. Later, Ava found me outside, leaning against the old truck. How'd it go? Better than expected, I said. She listened. Ava laughed. Imagine that. A journalist who listens. She asked if I regretted it, I said. And? I told her the truth. Ava looked at me, eyes soft. You're finally learning to live with the truth instead of fighting it. Maybe, I said. But the truth doesn't pay rent. She smiled. This place will. The Modern Legacy article dropped 2 weeks later. It wasn't what I expected. The wolf who built again, Liam Carver's quiet redemption. Once called a ruthless son, now a craftsman of grace, Carver's workshop doesn't just restore antiques. It restores stories, piece by piece. There were photos of the apprentices, the warehouse, even one of me standing beside Ava, both of us laughing mid-conversation. No drama. No sensationalism. Just honesty. For the first time in years, reading about myself didn't make my chest tighten. Then the emails started. Not from investors or critics, from strangers. A man from Ohio wrote, "You made me call my brother again." A woman from Vermont said, "My father and I restored our old cabin after reading your story." A teenager wrote, "I want to learn how to build things. Not buy them." I didn't know how to respond to any of it. So I didn't. But every letter I read felt like a small repair to something I hadn't realized was still broken. One night, Ava and I sat in the workshop long after everyone left. She scrolled through the article comments. "You've gone viral again," she said. "Except this time, no one's calling you a wolf." I chuckled. "That's because wolves don't need to howl once they've been heard." She looked at me, smiling faintly. "You sound like Mom again." "Maybe she's still teaching," I said. The next day, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Carver," a woman's voice said. "I represent a production company. We read the article. We'd like to discuss a documentary series on your story." I closed my eyes. Of course. The world always wanted to turn healing into entertainment. "I appreciate it," I said. "But I think this story's finished." "You could inspire millions," she insisted. "I already did," I said. Quietly. "That's enough." And I hung up. That evening, I locked up the workshop and stepped outside. The street was quiet, golden light spilling across the sidewalk. For once, I didn't feel like I had to protect anything. The family name was healed. The business was alive. And the past, the one I'd been fighting for years, finally felt complete. I took one last look at the sign above the door, ran my hand along the wood, and whispered, "Stay true, stay small." It wasn't a motto. It was a promise. Because sometimes peace doesn't come when the world sees you differently. It comes when you no longer need them to look at all. Peace never lasts long when people smell a story. A month after the Modern Legacy article, the workshop had become busier than ever. Apprentices filled every corner. Hammers clinking like a heartbeat. The quiet hum of honest work had become my favorite sound. Then, one afternoon, Ava walked in holding a glossy magazine. Her expression was tight. "Tell me this isn't real," she said, dropping it onto my workbench. The cover screamed in bold type, beneath it, my face. Except I hadn't given that interview. I frowned, flipping through the pages. The article was full of half-truths, recycled quotes, and a fabricated first-person narrative written in my supposed voice. It made me sound like I'd turned my family's destruction into a marketing strategy. "Who wrote this?" I asked. Ava folded her arms. "You really don't remember Marcus Dean?" I did. Unfortunately. Marcus had been a journalist at the Chronicle, the first to call me the wolf after the auction. He'd made a career off my humiliation, podcasts, think pieces, and panels about ruthless modern heirs. Now he was cashing in again, this time dressed as my biographer. He even quoted Mom, Ava said bitterly. "Fake gute." But still. I closed the magazine. He's desperate. The scandal gravy train must have dried up. "He's doing a book next," she said. "Already announced it." I stared at the photo on the cover, my own face looking smug and predatory. He was dragging me back into the past I'd just buried. That evening, I called Dana. "I want it stopped," I said. She sighed. "Defamation suits are messy, Liam. He's using public information and enough truth to hide behind free speech. He's using my story to sell lies. And you're feeding him by reacting." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "So what, I just let him rewrite me again?" She hesitated. "You said you didn't want to fight anymore. Maybe this is the test." I didn't answer. Because she was right, and I hated that she was right. The next morning, Marcus Dean himself showed up. He strolled into the workshop uninvited, sunglasses still on. Camera crew trailing behind him. "Well, if it isn't the man of the hour," he said, smirking. Ava froze behind the counter. "You can't just, it's fine," I said quietly. "Let him talk." Marcus grinned. "See? That's the new Liam Carver, zen, reformed, the soulful craftsman. Mind if we film a few shots? Background visuals for the doc." "You're not filming anything here." "Come on, Liam," he said. "I made you famous once. Let me make you beloved now." The crew laughed under their breath. I walked toward him slowly. "You didn't make me anything, Marcus. You just picked at the carcass." His grin faltered. "Touchy. Get out." He gestured to his cameraman. "Roll this. The wolf still has teeth." Perfect tagline. Before he could finish, I reached forward, not angrily, not violently, and pressed the lens cap back onto the camera. "No one films my story anymore without permission," I said calmly. "Not again." For a moment, the only sound was rain tapping the glass outside. Marcus looked at me, saw something he couldn't manipulate, and his smirk vanished. Fine, he said, snapping his fingers. Pack it up. As he left, he added over his shoulder, you'll regret this. People love the myth more than the man. I didn't reply. Because I finally understood something, myths only live if you keep feeding them. That night, Ava found me sanding down an old desk, the same one Dad used to use at the shop. You okay? She asked. Depends, I said. Am I allowed to be angry anymore? You're allowed, she said softly. You're just not allowed to stay there. I smiled faintly. Mom would have said the same thing. She'd probably add, fix something instead. So I did. I kept sanding until the wood was smooth again. Until the grain caught the light and the anger bled away. A week later, Marcus released a teaser video for his book online. But something strange happened. The top comments weren't in his favor. You're exploiting a man who already made amends. Stop milking someone's trauma for clicks. Funny how the wolf seems more human than the guy writing about him. The tide had turned. The same audience that once devoured scandal now rejected it. Because I hadn't defended myself with outrage, I'd stayed silent. And silence, this time, didn't mean weakness. It meant control. That weekend, I received a letter. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. It showed the old Carver storefront the night before the first auction, back when everything still belonged to all of us. On the back, a note in careful handwriting, you can't rewrite the past, but you can restore the frame. It wasn't signed. But I didn't need to guess who sent it. Marcus might have been a vulture, but even vultures sometimes drop something useful when they fly away. Later that night, I tacked the photo above my workbench. The shot wasn't perfect, a little blurry, colors off, composition crooked. But it was real. A reminder that every story, even the ugly ones, can be reframed. 2 weeks later, the noise faded. Marcus's book pre-orders tanked. His interviews dried up. People had moved on to the next scandal, the next wolf. And me? I was back at the workshop, teaching a group of apprentices how to repair cracked wood joints. One of them, a quiet kid named Noah, asked, Mr. Carver, how do you know when something's fixed enough? I thought for a moment. When it stops trying to hide the break, I said. That's when it's done. He nodded like he understood. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it too. That evening, I closed up the shop and stood outside watching the sunset turn the windows gold. Ava locked the door beside me. You handled that well, she said. I didn't handle it, I said. I just didn't fight it. She smiled. That's handling it. I chuckled softly. Maybe. I guess even wolves can learn when to stop chasing. I wasn't expecting another letter. Not after Mom's. But life has a habit of waiting until you've finally stopped looking backward before it throws one last piece of the past at your feet. It came on a Monday morning in a plain white envelope, no return address, postmarked from a legal firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a single handwritten page on yellowing paper. The handwriting stopped me cold. My father's. Liam, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And if I'm gone, it means there's no one left to argue with you about what family means. Maybe that's for the best. You were always the one I couldn't read. You'd go quiet when others shouted. You'd watch when others acted. That frightened me more than you'll ever know, because I saw myself in it. When we decided to sell the company, it wasn't because we wanted to erase you. It was because I was trying to save you from what it was doing to me. To all of us. The debts were worse than you knew. The investors were circling. I thought if I ended it clean, you could start fresh, free of the Carver curse. But I was wrong. You didn't need saving. You needed to be trusted. For that, I'm sorry. Dad, I must have read it 10 times before my hand stopped shaking. The words blurred in and out of focus. Like they didn't want to settle. The debts. The investors. The curse. He hadn't betrayed me out of greed. He'd done it out of fear. And in trying to protect me, he'd turned me into his enemy. Ava found me sitting on the office floor, the letter open beside me. What's that? She asked gently. I handed it to her. She read it slowly, lips trembling halfway through. He wrote to you, she whispered. But he never told me any of this. Because he didn't trust either of us, I said quietly. Not until it was too late. She looked up. You think it's true? I think it explains everything he never said out loud. Ava folded the letter carefully, as if it might shatter. Then what do you do with it? I don't know, I said. Maybe nothing. Maybe that's the point. For days after, I couldn't focus. Every nail I hammered. Every polish I brushed, it all blurred into the same thought. He wasn't trying to destroy me. He'd just been bad at loving me right. And I'd been worse at forgiving him in time. One evening, I drove out to the old cemetery on the edge of town. The wind was sharp, carrying the scent of rain and cedar. The grass around his grave had grown wild. The headstone was plain: Martin Carver, 1958-2024. Builder. Father. No bilabid. No mist. Just function, like the man himself. I crouched down, brushing leaves from the stone. I got your letter, I said quietly. You finally told me the truth. The sky was fading to orange. Somewhere nearby, a train whistle cut through the wind. I used to think you were afraid of me, I said. Turns out, you were afraid for me. That's different. And worse. I took a slow breath. I won't pretend we made peace. We didn't. But I'm not angry anymore. I set the letter down at the base of the stone. You were wrong about one thing. Though. The curse wasn't the business. It was pride. Then, softer, I broke it. On the drive back, I caught myself replaying flashes of memory, small ones. The smell of his pipe tobacco. The way he'd rest a hand on my shoulder when he thought no one was watching. The quiet grunt he made when something actually impressed him, though he'd never say it aloud. They hit harder than any argument we'd ever had. That night, Ava came over. She found me at the workbench, sanding a wooden frame. For Mom's letter? She asked. I nodded. And his. She watched for a moment, then said, You ever wonder if he'd be proud of you now? I smiled faintly. I think he'd be annoyed that I outbid him. Ava laughed, the kind of laugh that breaks tension instead of adds to it. Then she said, Maybe that's pride. Too. We hung both letters on the wall of the workshop, side by side. Her looping handwriting next to his sharp lines. Opposites, but part of the same story. Above them, I carved a small plaque: What's broken can still belong. The apprentices didn't ask who the letters were from. They just worked around them quietly. Like sacred relics. Weeks passed. The air grew colder. The workshop's first winter came with a kind of peace I hadn't known since before the betrayal. But one morning, a delivery arrived, a small package wrapped in brown paper, no return address again. Inside was a box of old Carver and Sons invoices and documents, some dating back decades. At the bottom was a ledger marked, Confidential. It detailed the same debts my father had mentioned: unpaid loans, backdoor investors, even bribes to secure contracts. Buried among them was one more surprise: a copy of a deed transfer signed in 2023. Not to me. To him. He'd been preparing to sell only his share, not mine. He'd tried to protect my part of the business by legally separating it before the auction. I hadn't saved the company from him. He'd been trying, clumsily, to save it for me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing the auctioneer's face, my family's shock. The gavel striking. All of it felt different now, heavier, less clean. Revenge had seemed like clarity. But truth was a blur. I'd punished him for a sin he hadn't fully committed. And that realization didn't undo my peace, but it made it quieter. More fragile. The next morning? I burned the ledger. Not out of denial. Out of understanding. Some truths aren't meant to be inherited. As the papers turned to ash, I whispered, You tried? Old man. The smoke curled upward, drifting out through the workshop rafters like forgiveness leaving its body. Later, Ava found me staring at the empty hearth. You okay? She asked. I nodded. Yeah. Just thinking. About him. About us, I said. And how we keep trying to fix things by breaking them first. She smiled faintly. Maybe that's just how Carvers work. Maybe, I said. But maybe it's time we learn a better way. That night, I hung one last photo between the two letters, the old storefront, repaired, lit up again. The past, the pain, the pride, all framed together. And for the first time, it didn't look like a wound. It looked like history. Something that finally belonged where it was. The fire from the burned ledger had long gone cold, but its warmth lingered. It didn't feel like destruction. It felt like pruning, like I'd cut away the parts of my story that didn't need to grow anymore. In the weeks that followed, something strange happened. Work didn't just feel productive, it felt alive. The apprentices worked harder, laughed louder. Clients came not for furniture, but for belonging. The Carver Restoration Workshop had quietly become more than a place to fix wood. It had become a place to fix people. One evening, Ava and I sat reviewing finances at the front counter. She looked up from her laptop. Do you realize how much we've made this quarter? I'm guessing more than dust and nostalgia. She grinned. 3 times that. And we've got waiting lists for classes through next spring. That's good, I said. She hesitated. It's more than good. It's big. Investors are calling. I stopped writing. Investors? People want to franchise the concept? Carver Restoration Studios. I chuckled. You're kidding. I'm not. They want to bring this to cities: Chicago, Boston, maybe even LA. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Funny. I spent years running from that kind of attention. And now it's chasing you. She smiled. But I could hear the hesitation in her voice, the same question forming in both our minds. Would expanding mean losing the soul of what we built? That night? I walked through the workshop after closing. The light bulbs hummed softly overhead. The smell of varnish clung to the air. Each table told a story, a cracked violin, a chipped jewelry box, an old mirror whose silver backing had been restored by hand. You can't franchise that kind of intimacy. I thought about Dad's letter. Legacy isn't what we keep. It's what we fix before we're gone. Maybe this was what he meant, that legacy doesn't grow by spreading. It grows by deepening. The next morning, I called a meeting. Ava, the apprentices, even Jordan from Wolf Hollow, all of them gathered around the main work table. I started simply. We've been offered a chance to expand. To go national. Gasps, smiles, whispers. Ava watched me carefully. And? I took a breath. And I said no. The room went quiet. One apprentice frowned. But, why? This place could change lives. It already does, I said. But the moment we turn it into a brand, it stops being a home. Ava exhaled slowly. Relief mixed with something like pride. I think you made the right call, she said softly. After the meeting, I found her in the office, looking at old photos of Mom and Dad. You could have disagreed, I said. I would have, once, she admitted. Back when I thought success was scale. And now? Now I think it's honesty. I smiled. Maybe we finally got that right. Don't get too sentimental, she said. Though her voice was warm. You're still the dramatic brother who renamed himself the Wolf. I didn't rename myself, I said. They did. She raised an eyebrow. And you liked it. I laughed. Maybe a little. Over the following months, we focused inward, refining our craft, growing our apprentices' skills. We started community workshops, teaching single parents how to fix old furniture, offering free repairs for historical landmarks. The workshop became less about profit and more about permanence. And the more we gave, the more the world seemed to give back. Then one evening, as we were locking up, Ava said, "You know, this might actually outlive us." I looked around. That's the idea. She smiled faintly. Do you ever miss it? Miss what? The fight. The fire. The chase. I thought about it. No, I said finally. I miss the noise sometimes. But not the chaos. She nodded. Peace suits you, Liam. It's weird, I admitted. For a long time, I thought peace would feel empty. But it feels full. Like silence with meaning. A few days later, I received an unexpected call. Mr. Carver, a voice said. This is Helen Ruiz, director of the State Arts Foundation. We'd like to honor your workshop with a Community Restoration Award. I blinked. You're serious? Completely. The ceremony's next month. You'll be recognized for revitalizing craftsmanship and preserving historical methods. It's quite a big deal. When I hung up, Ava saw my expression. Good news? Apparently. We're getting an award. She grinned. See? You can't hide forever. I'm not hiding, I said. Just keeping things quiet. She smirked. Try keeping this quiet when the governor shakes your hand. The award ceremony took place in a converted theater downtown. Rows of people in suits. Cameras. Flashbulbs. I stood at the podium, the spotlight hot against my face. The announcer read the citation, for turning legacy into community. For proving that restoration isn't just about things, it's about people. When I stepped up to speak, I saw Ava smiling in the front row. I took a slow breath. I used to think legacy was something you left behind, I said. But it's not. It's what you build while you're still here, the part of you that keeps repairing the world, even after you stop trying to own it. Applause filled the room. And for once, I didn't feel like I was performing. I felt like I was coming home again, but this time, on my own terms. After the ceremony, a reporter asked, Mr. Carver, what does it feel like to go from scandal to symbol of redemption? I smiled. Feels like proof that even the black sheep can mend the fence. The quote hit headlines the next morning. But this time, I didn't cringe when I read it. Because for the first time, the headline didn't belong to the wolf. It belonged to the man who stopped needing to be one. That night, I returned to the workshop alone. The letters on the wall, Mom's looping script, Dad's sharp lines, glowed softly in the lamplight. I sat beneath them, tired, grateful, quiet. Outside, the world hummed with noise. But inside, there was only stillness, and the sound of the building settling. Like it was exhaling after holding its breath for too many years. Before turning out the lights, I whispered, we fixed it, Mom. We fixed us. The silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt whole. Peace never announces when it's about to be tested. It just slips quietly into the room one morning and places an envelope on your desk. Mine was white, heavy, embossed with a gold seal. When I opened it, I saw the words, Smithsonian American Heritage Initiative, Invitation to Exhibit and Partner. They wanted to feature Carver Restoration Workshop in a nationwide museum exhibit, American Hands, The Art of Restoration. My name. My story. Our work. Front and center. It was the kind of recognition that made careers. That turned stories into legacies. And yet, when I read it, my first instinct wasn't excitement. It was hesitation. Ava found me staring at the letter half an hour later. You look like someone just offered you a funeral, she said. In a way, I replied. They want to make us permanent. She grinned. You're kidding. The Smithsonian? Liam. That's huge. I know. So why do you look like you're about to decline? I set the letter down. Because permanence has a price. Once we step onto that stage, we stop being a workshop. We become a monument. Maybe that's not a bad thing, she said softly. Maybe it's time the world sees what we've built. I looked at her. The world already sees. The people who matter, they're the ones in this room. In this town, fixing broken things with their own hands. She sighed. You always did think too small. I smiled. No. I just finally learned to think enough. That night, I walked through the workshop in the dark. The moonlight poured through the high windows, touching the tables, the tools, the photos on the wall. I stopped in front of my parents' letters again. Would you want this? I asked the silence. Would you want our name in a museum? The stillness didn't answer. But the creak of the floorboards almost sounded like a whisper, build, but don't forget why. The next morning, Dana called. I heard about the Smithsonian offer, she said. Congratulations. Don't start, I said. You're going to tell me I'd be insane to turn it down. She laughed. I wasn't going to say that. But I am going to say you've spent years proving you're more than the story people told about you. Maybe now it's time to own the story yourself. And what if owning it ruins it? She paused. Then maybe it wasn't as real as you thought. Her words hung in my mind long after we ended the call. 2 days later, I found Ava in the workshop's back office, sketching new layouts for classes. Do you remember when we were kids? I said. You always wanted to paint, and I always wanted to fix. She smiled. Yeah. You'd take apart Mom's clock just to see how it worked. And you'd repaint the pieces. She looked up. Why? I'm thinking about the Smithsonian, I said quietly. About what this place means. It's not just restoration anymore. It's inheritance. She nodded slowly. So what's holding you back? Fear, I admitted. That they'll turn us into something too perfect, too polished. We've spent years teaching people to love the cracks. Ava leaned forward. Then tell that story. Don't let them curate it for you. Write it yourself. Her voice reminded me of Mom, calm, steady, certain. Maybe you're right, I said. I usually am, she said, smiling. The Smithsonian team arrived the following week, 3 curators, 2 photographers, 1 historian. They moved through the workshop with reverence, documenting every detail, the chipped workbenches, the half-finished pieces, the old sign that still said Carver and Sons. The lead curator, a woman named Dr. Hayes, turned to me. Your space feels alive. Most exhibits we feature feel frozen. That's because everything here is still healing, I said. She smiled. Exactly why we want it. They proposed a traveling exhibit, restoration, the Carver way. Workshops. Demonstrations. Talks. The kind of thing that would turn our story into legend. But as the meeting went on, I felt something tightening inside me, the old itch of ambition. The hunger that used to drive me when I still needed to prove I belonged. It scared me how familiar it felt. That evening, Ava found me sitting alone in the office, staring at the proposal. You're overthinking again, she said gently. It's what I do best. She sat across from me. Dad once told me something, back when everything was falling apart. He said, the Carvers never knew how to stop building, even when the foundation was cracking. I nodded. Sounds about right. Maybe this time, she said softly, you can build without breaking. The next morning, I made my decision. When the Smithsonian team returned, I thanked them for the offer, then surprised everyone. I'll accept, I said, on one condition. Dr. Hayes tilted her head. Which is? That the exhibit isn't about me. It's about the craft. The people. The hands that do the work. If you turn this into another story about a prodigal son or a scandal-turned success, I walk. She studied me, then smiled. You drive a hard bargain, Mr. Carver. I've had practice. Over the next months, we prepared the exhibit. I trained apprentices for live demonstrations. Ava curated pieces with stories written by their restorers. The title changed too, not the Carver way, but Restoration, Hands That Remember. When the exhibit launched, it wasn't just furniture on display. It was lives, mended, imperfect, beautiful. There were no photographs of me on the walls. Just a single quote on the entrance plaque: "We're not fixing what's broken. We're remembering what still holds." Liam Carver. The opening night was surreal, a crowd of hundreds, the hum of admiration. The smell of varnish and old wood carried faintly through the air. But I didn't linger near the cameras. I stood off to the side, watching strangers trace their fingers across the grain of restored tables, seeing their faces soften as they understood this wasn't about fame. It was about connection. Ava found me near the exit. "You did it," she said. "No," I said quietly. "We did." She looked around, eyes glimmering. "Think Mom and Dad would be proud?" "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe they'd just finally rest." Later that night, after the crowd had gone, I walked back through the exhibit alone. The room was silent except for the faint echo of my footsteps. Each piece glowed under the soft lights, stories preserved in wood and glass. At the center stood Mom's rocking chair. I placed my hand on it, tracing the smooth curve of the armrest. And in that moment, I realized, legacy doesn't need to be immortal. It just needs to last long enough to teach someone else how to care. Fame has a scent. You recognize it the moment it walks in the door, a mix of perfume, flashbulb residue, and too much enthusiasm. After the Smithsonian exhibit launched, the scent came back strong. It started with a few interviews, harmless, respectful, thoughtful. Then came the flood. Podcasts, television spots, a biopic proposal. Everyone suddenly wanted the wolf who rebuilt the world. It was almost funny, if it wasn't terrifying. One morning, Ava burst into the workshop holding her phone. "You're trending," she said breathlessly. "I better not be," I muttered. She showed me the screen anyway. A viral clip from the exhibit opening, me standing beside the rocking chair, saying, "Legacy doesn't need to be immortal. It just needs to teach someone else how to care." 50,000 shares. Hundreds of comments. Thousands of people quoting it like scripture. "See?" Ava said. "You're inspiring people." I stared at the screen. "I'm being consumed again." She frowned. "That's not fair. This time it's admiration, not attack." "Admiration turns to appetite," I said. "They always want more. More story. More tragedy. More wolf." Ava sighed. "You can't hide forever, Liam. The story's bigger than you now. That's what scares me." By the end of the week, my inbox was a battlefield of offers. Publishing deals. Brand collaborations. Even an invitation to speak at an entrepreneurship conference titled, "From Failure to Fortune." The irony made me laugh out loud. That was the same conference that once rescinded my ticket during the scandal years. Now they wanted me as keynote. I turned it all down. Every last one. Ava called it stubborn. Dana called it strategic. But I knew what it really was, self-preservation. I'd rebuilt my life around stillness. And I wasn't about to trade it for another round of applause. Then came the interview request that almost broke me. The Chronicle. The very newspaper Marcus Dean had worked for. A new editor, new team. Wanting to revisit the myth responsibly. Their message ended with a line that felt like bait: "We believe your story deserves the dignity of your own words this time." Ava thought it was a chance for closure. I thought it was a test. When the journalist arrived, a woman named Camille Reyes, she didn't start with small talk. She looked around the workshop, taking in every detail, before saying, "You know, this place smells like truth." I raised an eyebrow. "Truth smells like varnish and sawdust?" She smiled. "Sometimes." She was different, calm, patient, no recorder yet. "I'm not here to rehash," she said. "I'm here to understand why you stayed when you could have gone global." "Because peace doesn't scale," I said. She nodded thoughtfully. "And yet, you still built something everyone wants a piece of." "That's the danger," I said. "People love restoration stories, until they realize they can't buy the soul that built them." Camille smiled faintly. "Then maybe your real legacy isn't what you made, but what you refused to sell." For the first time that week, I felt understood. After the interview, Camille sent me a preview of the piece. The title stopped me cold. "The Wolf Who Learned to Listen." I read the first paragraph, once known for his silence. Liam Carver has turned that silence into a kind of wisdom, a language of wood, patience, and redemption. In a world addicted to noise, he chose quiet, and the quiet chose him back. It wasn't about scandal or spectacle. It was about grace. And for the first time, I didn't feel exposed. I felt seen. The article exploded online. But this time, the noise didn't sting. People weren't obsessed with me anymore. They were talking about forgiveness, craft, slowness. The workshop's waitlist doubled again. But instead of investors, it was letters, from schools, from parents, from artists who wanted to learn the Carver method. They didn't want the wolf. They wanted the teacher. One evening, a local news crew arrived to film a short piece. The reporter, a young man, asked, "Mr. Carver, what's your secret to success?" I smiled. I stopped trying to win. He blinked. That's unexpected. It's also true, I said. The moment I stopped fighting for control, everything started to grow. That clip went viral too, but this time, it didn't bother me. Because it wasn't about me clawing for redemption anymore. It was about people realizing they didn't have to fight so hard to heal. Later that night, Ava and I sat outside the workshop, the air cool and sweet. She scrolled through her phone. "You know, people are calling this the Carver movement." I groaned. "That sounds like a bad self-help brand." She laughed. "You're trending, Liam. Again. I guess there's no escaping it." She looked at me, serious now. "Maybe you're not supposed to escape it. Maybe the world needs someone to show that stillness isn't weakness." I looked up at the stars, quiet, infinite, patient. "Maybe," I said. "But I'll never let them turn it into noise." The next morning, I found a note slipped under the workshop door. No signature. Just 5 words written in neat cursive, "The wolf finally found peace." No camera crews, no byline. Just someone who understood. I taped it to the wall beside my parents' letters. It didn't need to be framed. It already was. As I locked up that night, I stood in the doorway a little longer than usual. The city hummed beyond the street, traffic, laughter, life. Inside, the air was still, warm, glowing. For years, I'd fought to prove I was more than a name. Now, I didn't have to. Because the world finally knew what I did, the wolf never hunted for power. He hunted for peace. And when he found it, he stayed. The letter arrived on a Wednesday. It wasn't from a lawyer, a journalist, or an admirer. It was from the County Historical Society. They'd purchased the old Carver estate, my childhood home, for restoration. And they wanted my help. I almost laughed. After all these years, after everything that happened in that house, they wanted me to restore it. Ava read the email over my shoulder. "You have to do it." "I don't have to step back into a mausoleum," I said quietly. "It's not a mausoleum anymore," she replied. "It's history. You turned every other wound into art, Liam. Why not this one?" I looked at her, the steadiness in her eyes, the same stubborn warmth Mom used to have. "All right," I said. "But only once." A week later, I drove out past the city limits, through the winding backroads that used to define our world. The estate sat on a hill, surrounded by trees that had grown taller, wilder. The gates were rusted open, as if the house had stopped guarding itself years ago. The driveway was cracked, weeds breaking through the concrete like time reclaiming what was stolen. But the house, even after all these years, still stood proud. 3 stories of gray stone and memory. The front door creaked as I stepped inside. The air smelled of dust, pine, and faint traces of my mother's old perfume. Every sound echoed, my footsteps, the floorboard sighing, the whisper of rain starting outside. I walked slowly through each room. The dining room where arguments had dressed as conversation. The study where my father had kept his ledgers, the same ones that nearly consumed him. The staircase where I once sat as a boy, listening to voices through the walls, learning that silence was sometimes the loudest defense. Everything felt smaller now. Time does that, it shrinks the monsters until you realize they were never as big as your fear made them. I found the old family portrait still hanging crooked in the hallway. We were all there, Dad looking stern, Mom radiant, Ava smiling wide, and me, eyes defiant. Half turned away. It used to hurt to look at that picture. Now, it just felt honest. I touched the frame lightly. "Guess we made it through, huh?" I whispered. A floorboard creaked behind me. "Talking to ghosts again?" I turned. Ava stood there, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You didn't think I'd let you face this alone, did you?" she said. I smiled faintly. "You were supposed to wait outside. And miss this?" She handed me a cup. "Not a chance." We sat on the dusty floor of the old living room, steam rising between us. "Do you ever wonder," she said, "if all this pain was necessary?" I thought for a long moment. "Maybe not necessary," I said. "But inevitable. Some families build their love out of warmth. Ours built it out of fire." Ava chuckled softly. "At least we learned to stop burning." "Yeah," I said. "Eventually." As we talked, a storm began to roll in. Thunder rumbled in the distance, the sky flickering white. I walked over to the big front window, the same one that used to overlook the town and watch the rain start to fall. In the reflection, I saw not the man who'd once been humiliated at an auction or the boy who'd never fit at the dinner table. I saw someone whole. Someone who had finally stopped running from the house that built him. Ava joined me by the window. "Do you remember that night Dad came home late from the factory?" she asked suddenly. I nodded. "The night the lights went out?" "Yeah. You went down to the basement with a flashlight. You fixed the fuse box." I smiled faintly. He said, "You'll make a better man than I ever was." Ava's voice softened. "He was right, you know." I looked out into the storm. No. He just didn't get the chance to learn how. After the rain slowed, we walked through the rest of the house, room by room. We found old tools in the shed, a broken clock in the parlor, a box of family albums water-stained but salvageable. "Let's restore these," Ava said. "Not for them. For us." So we did. We set up a temporary workstation right there in the estate, the same family that once fell apart rebuilding the place that broke them. There was something poetic in that. As we worked, I found an old journal tucked behind a loose panel in the hallway. It wasn't my father's this time. It was Mom's. Her handwriting danced across the yellow pages, notes about clients, sketches of furniture, recipes, but also quiet confessions. One entry stopped me cold. June 8, 2009. Liam doesn't know how much I see. He thinks silence means invisibility. But his quiet is strength. Someday, when all of this noise collapses, he'll be the one left standing in the stillness. And that's where the truth will live. I sat there for a long time, tracing her words with my thumb. She'd known. All along. That evening, we packed up to leave. The house was dark again, but this time it didn't feel haunted. It felt emptied, like something had finally been lifted out of its bones. At the door, I turned back one last time. The portrait still hung on the wall. I took it down, carried it to the truck, and placed it gently beside the restored box of photographs. Ava started the engine. "Ready?" she asked. I looked back at the house through the rain-specked windshield. "Yeah," I said. "Let it rest." When we got home, I hung the portrait in the workshop, above Mom and Dad's letters. Not as a reminder of what we'd lost, but of what we finally reclaimed. Ava poured us both a drink and raised her glass. "To ghosts," she said. "To peace," I replied. We clinked glasses, and for the first time, the sound didn't echo. It settled. Like closure. That night, as I locked up the workshop, I looked once more at the wall, the letters, the portrait, the note that read, "The wolf finally found peace." Everything was there, the past, the pain, the redemption, framed perfectly together. And I realized something I'd never dared to believe before: the black sheep never wanted to destroy the flock. He just wanted to lead them somewhere quiet enough to heal. The invitation felt almost unreal. "You are cordially invited to attend the Centennial Charity Auction at the State Museum of Art." I laughed when I read it. The universe had a wicked sense of humor. The last time I stood at an auction, I'd been the punchline, the outcast son watching his legacy get sold to strangers. Now they wanted me to host the same kind of event, this time to raise funds for community restoration projects. Poetic irony doesn't knock. It lets itself in. Ava grinned when I showed her the card. "You have to go," she said. "Think of the symmetry." "I'm not sure irony is a reason to attend a gala," I replied. "Then do it for the cause," she said. "For Mom. For the craft." I sighed. "Fine. But I'm not wearing a tux." She smirked. "You're definitely wearing a tux." The night of the auction shimmered with soft jazz and champagne light. The museum's marble floors gleamed. The crowd buzzing with polite wealth. Cameras flashed, names whispered, all the noise I'd once drowned in. At the center of the hall stood the night's main attraction, Lot 47, the Carver rocking chair, restored by Liam Carver. My mother's chair. It felt like time folding in on itself. I traced the armrest gently. "You've made quite the journey," I murmured. Behind me, someone said, "You gave it life again." I turned. It was Camille Reyes, the journalist who'd written The Wolf Who Learned to Listen. "I'm starting to think you follow me," I said. "Only the story's worth finishing," she replied. "You ready for tonight?" "As ready as you can be to sell a ghost," I said. She smiled. "Maybe you're not selling it. Maybe you're setting it free." When the auction began, I sat near the back, unseen, anonymous among the glitter. The auctioneer, a young man with the same sharp confidence as the one from years ago, took the stage. His voice rang out, "Lot 47, an original piece restored by Liam Carver, donated to fund preservation grants for local artisans." Applause rippled through the crowd. I expected to feel nervous. But instead, a strange calm settled over me. The gavel struck. "We'll start the bidding at 10,000. Hands lifted. Numbers climbed. 20, 30, 40. By the time it hit 85,000, the room was electric. The auctioneer smiled wide. 90,000. Do I hear? A voice from the front interrupted. 200,000. The room fell silent. Every head turned. At the center table sat a man in his 70s, white-haired, expensive suit, calm smile. It took me a second to recognize him. Marcus Dean. The same journalist who once branded me the wolf. Now bidding to buy my redemption. The irony was almost too clean to be real. The auctioneer, unaware, stammered. 200,000, going once, withdraw the lot, I said. The entire room turned. I rose from my seat, voice steady. This piece isn't for sale anymore. The auctioneer blinked. Mr. Carver, the bids, I know what they are, I said. But some stories aren't meant to be bought twice. Whispers spread like wildfire. Cameras flashed. Marcus raised an eyebrow, amused. Making a scene again. Carver. No, I said softly. Ending one. I walked to the stage, lifted the chair, and carried it down the aisle. The crowd parted like a tide. Marcus called after me, you could have been a legend. I stopped, turned just enough for him to hear. I already am, I said. Just not the kind you write about? Outside, the night air felt clean, cold, alive. I set the chair in the back of the truck. Ava met me on the steps, eyes wide. You just walked out of a six-figure sale. I know. Why? I smiled. Because peace doesn't have a price tag. She stared for a moment, then laughed softly. Mom would have loved that. She would have rolled her eyes, I said. We both laughed. The next morning, headlines exploded again. Liam Carver walks out of charity auction, donates funds anyway. Because that's what I did. I matched Marcus Dean's final bid and donated it to the restoration fund myself. The story spread, but not as scandal. As principle. People wrote. He didn't sell the past. He restored its meaning. And that, I realized, was the truest kind of fame, to be understood without performing. Weeks later, the chair sat in the workshop window, not for sale, not for display, just home. Clients came, apprentices worked, and life flowed quietly around me again. Ava leaned against the counter one evening, sipping coffee. You really did it, you know. Did what? Broke the curse. I smiled. Maybe the curse was never ours. Maybe it was just forgetting who we were. She nodded. So what now? Now, I said, we keep fixing things. Until there's nothing left to fix but ourselves. One afternoon. Months later, I received a small package with no name. Inside was a silver nameplate engraved with 3 words, no sender, no note. Just quiet acknowledgement. I mounted it on the wall above the door, where the sunlight caught it every morning. People asked what it meant. I just smiled. It's a reminder that even wolves can build dens. That evening, I locked up and stood in the doorway one last time as the sun set. The golden light stretched across the workshop, touching every letter, every frame, every scar in the wood. The air smelled like sawdust and rain, the scent of something ending and beginning at once. I took a deep breath. This was where it started, the betrayal. The fury, the climb back. And this was where it would rest, not in fame, not in legacy, but in stillness. For the first time, I felt truly, wholly finished. I turned off the lights, stepped outside, and whispered into the dusk, the black sheep came home. No one heard it but me. And that was enough. The seasons began to move differently after the auction. Not faster. Not slower. Just honest. There were no breaking headlines anymore. No cameras at the window, no calls from the press. Only the rhythmic noise of creation, the hum of saws, the scrape of sandpaper, the low murmur of apprentices asking questions. Peace had texture now. You could feel it under your palms. One morning, I came into the workshop and found Noah, my quietest apprentice, hunched over an antique cabinet. He'd been working on it for weeks, refusing help. Stubborn in a way that reminded me too much of myself at his age. How's it coming? I asked. He didn't look up. Almost there. The hinge keeps slipping. Show me. He adjusted the metal, tightened a screw, pressed the door shut. It clicked perfectly into place. His eyes widened. It worked. I smiled. Sometimes you just need to stop forcing it. The wood already knows how it wants to fit. He nodded slowly, as if the words meant more than just carpentry. Ava came in later that morning with a box of pastries and 2 stacks of paperwork. You've officially been invited to sit on the board of the Regional Arts Foundation, she said, handing me an envelope. I raised an eyebrow. They're letting wolves in now. They're letting teachers in, she said. Big difference. I tore the envelope open, scanning the letter. They want to partner with the workshop, Ava explained. Create a community grant, tools, materials, Training. It'd be called the Carver Fund. I laughed softly. You already picked the name? Of course, she said. You were never good at branding. Over the following weeks, the workshop became a revolving door of new faces. Retirees. Teenagers. Single mothers. Veterans. People who had nothing in common except one thing, something broken they wanted to fix with their own hands. We started Saturday classes. At first, just a few students. Then dozens. Each person brought something to restore, an old chair, a jewelry box, a guitar. But it wasn't about the objects. It was about what those objects carried. The first class ended with silence, everyone staring at the piece they'd repaired. One woman said softly, "It's not perfect." "No," I said. "But neither are we. And yet here we are." They laughed, and something inside me loosened that I didn't know was still tight. A few weeks later, Noah approached me with a wrapped bundle. "I finished it," he said. When I unwrapped it, I saw a small wooden plaque, hand-carved, beautifully sanded. Finished in deep walnut oil. It read, "Stillness is the loudest sound." I looked up at him. "You remembered that. You said it the first week I was here," he said. I didn't understand it then. Now I do. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "You did good work, Noah." He smiled, that quiet, proud kind of smile you don't forget. Later that night, Ava and I stood at the back of the workshop watching the apprentices clean up. "Do you realize what you've done?" she asked. "I made a mess and taught people how to sweep it up." She nudged me. "You built a future." I watched the kids laughing as they put away tools. "No," I said softly. "They're building it. I'm just keeping the lights on." Spring turned to summer. The workshop had expanded, a second building now stood behind the original. Smaller but full of promise. The sign above the new door read Carver Learning Studio. Ava had taken charge of the foundation side, securing grants, organizing local events. Even speaking at schools about restoration as therapy. I preferred the background. The sawdust. The rhythm. One day, she said, "You know, people are calling this the Carver Revival." I shook my head. "We're not reviving anything. We're remembering." A month later, we hosted our first exhibition, Hands That Remember. Each apprentice displayed a restored piece with a story attached. The room glowed with warmth and raw emotion, chipped wood polished back to beauty, imperfections left visible on purpose. When it was my turn to speak, I said simply, "We don't fix things to erase their history. We fix them so their history doesn't end." The crowd went quiet. That night, I watched strangers run their fingers along the seams of repaired tables, smiling softly. They weren't admiring perfection. They were admiring survival. After the exhibit, a local journalist interviewed Noah. They asked, "What's the most important thing you've learned here?" He said, "That everything broken still has a voice. You just have to listen long enough." When I read that the next morning, I felt something shift, pride mixed with humility. Like hearing your own echo come back changed and better. That's when I knew. Legacy wasn't a building. It wasn't even a name. It was a language, one you teach by doing, not saying. One afternoon, Ava came to me with a surprise. She'd commissioned a bronze plaque for the workshop entrance. It read, "In honor of those who restore not for profit, but for peace." Underneath was a smaller inscription, founded by Liam and Ava Carver, in memory of their parents, Martin and Eleanor. I traced the letters slowly. "You sure about that wording?" She nodded. "It's not just our story anymore." For the first time, I believed her. That night, I closed the shop and sat alone under the old hanging sign. The moonlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the rocking chair, Mom's chair, still perfectly balanced, creaking softly with the breeze. For years, that sound had haunted me. Now it soothed me. I closed my eyes, listening. That creak wasn't memory anymore. It was music. And as I sat there, I thought about all the words I'd said over the years, the fights, the speeches, the apologies. None of them mattered as much as this one truth: the best revenge isn't being remembered. It's leaving behind something worth continuing. Peace looks beautiful on paper. But peace doesn't pay rent. The first warning came in the form of a polite letter from the city office, neat, official, and ominous. Due to upcoming urban development plans, your property has been zoned for potential reassessment. Please contact the council to discuss the renewal of your operating permit. Translation: they wanted to buy the land. And if I refused? They'd build around us until we couldn't afford to stay. Ava was livid when she found out. "They can't just bulldoze a community center," she said, slamming the letter on the counter. "They won't," I said. "Not yet." She gave me that look, the one that said, "You're too calm for this." But calm was the one thing I'd learned to master. That night, I sat in the workshop long after everyone had left. The ticking of a dozen clocks filled the silence. each one perfectly in rhythm, except one. A small wall clock in the corner clicked a half-second too late. Out of sync. But still steady. It reminded me of us. The world could try to rush us forward, but we'd keep our own time. A few days later, I met with the city's development representative, a man named Thomas Keene. He was the kind of professional who smiled too often and listened too little. Mr. Carver, he began smoothly, we admire what you've done here. Truly inspiring. But the city's moving toward modernization. That means growth. And growth requires change. I leaned back in my chair. You're talking about demolition. He smiled politely. We prefer the word redevelopment. We'd like to relocate your workshop to a new site. Bigger space, newer facilities. Newer doesn't mean better, I said. Mr. Carver, he said, lowering his voice. This property's value has tripled in the last 2 years. You could sell, reinvest, open multiple branches. Imagine the reach. I almost laughed. That's the same pitch my father once took. And look how far you've come since him, he said, not realizing the irony. I stood. This place isn't for sale. Not now. Not ever. He sighed. Then I'll have to bring it to council. Do what you need to, I said. But remember, some things don't rebuild once you tear them down. Ava called it reckless. Dana called it principled. I called it necessary. But as weeks passed, the tension grew. The city began construction on the surrounding lots, condos, glass offices, luxury retail. Property taxes rose. Permits delayed. Suppliers got nervous. We weren't being bulldozed physically. We were being suffocated economically. One evening, I sat across from Ava in the office, the bills spread out between us. We can't keep this up forever, she said quietly. I know. Maybe we compromise, she said. Sell the front lot, keep the back studio. It's still ours. Just smaller. Mom didn't teach us to build halfway. She also didn't teach us to drown in sentiment, she shot back. You're starting to sound like Dad when he refused to let go. The words landed hard. Ava froze. Liam, I didn't mean, no, I said. You're right. Silence stretched between us. For a moment, I felt that old fear, the one that ran through every Carver generation like bad wiring. Pride pretending to be integrity. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Dad's voice from his old letter, you didn't need saving. You needed to be trusted. Maybe the same applied to this place. Maybe I didn't need to protect it like a child. Maybe I needed to trust it to survive without me. The next morning, I went downtown, not to the city council, but to a local business consortium. They specialized in heritage preservation, buying old properties and converting them into protected landmarks. The same kind of bureaucracy that once terrified me. When I explained what the workshop was, the woman across the table, gray-haired, clear-eyed, said, You're not just preserving wood, Mr. Carver. You're preserving identity. I'm preserving peace, I said. Then let's protect it legally. By the end of that month, the Carver Restoration Workshop was officially designated a cultural heritage site. It couldn't be sold. It couldn't be demolished. It could only be preserved. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd built something the world could no longer take. When the notice came through, Ava hugged me so tight I thought my ribs might crack. You did it, she whispered. No, I said. We did it right this time. The news spread fast. Reporters called. Bloggers wrote. The same council members who had once tried to buy me out suddenly claimed credit for preserving community heritage. I didn't care. Let them have the politics. I had the peace. Weeks later, Thomas Keene stopped by the workshop again. He looked around, at the students, the noise, the laughter, and sighed. Guess I underestimated you, he said. No, I said. You underestimated the wood. He smirked. You really think this place will outlast progress? I smiled. Progress is just history repeating itself with better lighting. He laughed softly. You really are your father's son. Not anymore, I said. I learned from his mistakes. He nodded once, respectfully this time. Then I suppose you deserve to keep your kingdom. Not a kingdom, I said. A workshop. After he left, I walked through the back studio, sunlight streaming through the skylight, dust motes dancing in the beams. Noah and 2 other apprentices were sanding down an old piano. The sound like a soft heartbeat. I stood there, hands in my pockets, watching them work. This was it, the thing my father had tried to build and failed. Not an empire. A continuation. That night, I found myself back in the office, staring at the letters on the wall, Mom's, Dad's, the plaque, the portrait. The past had finally stopped feeling like a burden. It felt like foundation. I poured 2 glasses of whiskey, one for me, One for the ghosts, and said quietly, "We finally did it right, old man. No surtkuts. No fear. Just hands and time." Outside, the city hummed with neon and noise. But inside, everything was still. It was early autumn when he came back. I recognized him before he spoke, the slow, deliberate walk, the trench coat just a bit too sharp for small-town streets, the faint smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. Marcus Dean. The man who'd built a career by turning my humiliation into headlines. I was teaching a small class on hand finishing when the doorbell chimed. The apprentices looked up, curious. "Can I help you?" I asked, though I already knew. He smiled, polite, almost humble. "You already have." The room went silent. I excused myself, wiping my hands on a cloth, and nodded toward the back office. "Let's talk where ghosts won't interrupt." In the office, sunlight cut through the window blinds, striping the walls like an old film reel. Marcus looked older. The confidence was still there. But something underneath had softened, the kind of wear that fame can't polish out. He didn't sit right away. "I wasn't sure you'd see me," he said finally. "I wasn't sure you'd show up," I replied. He nodded. "Fair." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of hammers and laughter from the workshop filtered in faintly, the life I'd rebuilt whispering proof of what time could do. He took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology." I almost smiled. "That's a first." "I deserve that," he said. "I wrote things about you that weren't fair." I twisted silence into guilt because guilt sells. "Honesty doesn't," I said. "No. It doesn't." He looked down at his hands. I told myself it was journalism. But it was ego. "You were the perfect story, the prodigal failure, the arrogant son. You made people feel better about their own messes. Until I didn't." He nodded. "Yeah. And when you didn't, I didn't know how to write about it." He reached into his bag and pulled out a small, black notebook. "I'm writing something new," he said. "Not a scandal. A book about truth, about people who outlived their myths. I want to tell your story again. The real one this time." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "You think I need rewriting?" "No," he said softly. "I think I do." That was the first honest thing I'd ever heard him say. For a long while, I didn't answer. Finally, I said, "Why me?" He shrugged. "Because you're the one I got wrong. The world loves a villain turned hero, but you never turned anything. You just waited until people realized you weren't the monster they needed." "Sounds like you figured out how to write poetry," I said. He chuckled. "Guess time makes poets out of cowards." He slid the notebook across the desk. "Everything I've drafted so far. Read it. If there's one thing in there that feels false, I'll scrap the whole thing." I hesitated before picking it up. The first page stopped me cold. He didn't rebuild to be seen. He rebuilt because silence, when tended long enough, turns into music. For the first time, I saw my story written not like a headline, but like a hymn. I closed the notebook. "It's good." He exhaled. "So you'll let me publish it?" I shook my head. "No," his face fell. "No. Not because it's wrong," I said. "Because you already told my story once. This one's mine to keep." He nodded slowly, disappointment fading into understanding. "You really did change." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe I just stopped needing to prove it." He stood to leave, but paused at the door. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "you taught me something." "What's that?" "That silence isn't weakness. It's waiting for the world to catch up." I smiled faintly. "Took you long enough." He grinned, a real one this time. "Yeah. But I got there." When he left, the workshop felt brighter somehow, lighter. I watched him cross the street and disappear into the crowd. For a moment, I wondered if that was what forgiveness felt like, not fireworks or tears. Just the quiet release of something heavy you didn't know you were still carrying. That evening, Ava came by after closing. She noticed the notebook on the desk. "Whose is that?" "Marcus Dean's," I said. Her eyes widened. "You're kidding. What did he want?" "To apologize." "Did you let him?" "Yeah," I said. "And then I let him go." She smiled. "You really are impossible to write about, you know that?" "Good," I said. "Maybe that's the point." Weeks later, a package arrived with no return label. Inside was the same notebook, except one page had been added at the end. "To Liam Carver, the man who proved that redemption isn't loud. It's patient. You were never the wolf. You were the quiet after." No signature, no name. He didn't need one. I placed the notebook beside my father's letter. 2 apologies, years apart, both finally delivered. That night, I sat at the workbench long after the lights went out. Outside, the wind carried faint music from a bar down the street. Inside, The workshop breathed its usual rhythm, creaks, hums, the heartbeat of a place that had become more human than building. I thought about Marcus, about my father. About all the men who'd mistaken control for strength. And then I thought about the apprentices, the laughter, the wood, the slow restoration of everything that once felt lost. It wasn't forgiveness that saved me. It was learning when to stop keeping score. Before heading upstairs, I looked around one last time. The chair. The plaque. The letters. Everything exactly where it belonged. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full. Full of the sound of things finally staying fixed. The morning Ava told me she was leaving, the light in the workshop felt different, warmer, almost hesitant. She stood at the doorway, holding a travel mug and an envelope. The kind of envelope that doesn't bring bad news, just change. You've got that look, I said. The one that means my life's about to rearrange itself again. She smiled. I got the grant. I raised an eyebrow. Which one? The international one. The Carver Foundation is expanding. They want me to establish the first overseas program, restoration training in Florence. For a second, all I heard was the ticking of the clocks around us. Florence, I repeated. As in Italy. She nodded. As in where craftsmanship started. I exhaled slowly. You're really going? I am, she said softly. You built this place, Liam. It's time someone carried it somewhere else. We sat in the corner office. Sunlight streaking the desk between us. So this is what, 6 months? I asked. She hesitated. 2 years. That hit harder than I expected. 2 years. 2 years without her laughter echoing down the hall, without her storming in with coffee and a new project idea. Without her gentle reminders that legacy wasn't supposed to feel like a burden. You'll do fine without me, she said. That's what I'm afraid of, I muttered. She laughed. Don't you dare start getting sentimental on me. I'm not, I said. I'm just proud. She smiled, but her eyes glistened. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. The next few weeks blurred into preparation, paperwork, shipments, endless calls. The workshop buzzed with talk of her leaving. The apprentices built her a wooden chest for the trip, each carving their initials into the inside panel. When she saw it, she almost cried. Noah said, so you remember us when you become famous. Ava smiled. Fame's overrated. I'm just taking the noise somewhere else. I stood in the back, watching her hug them all. Pride and ache mixed into something bittersweet. The same emotion I used to feel when finishing a restoration, satisfaction that it was whole. Sadness that it no longer needed my hands. A week before she left, we drove out to the old estate one last time. It was still quiet. Still half swallowed by ivy and thyme. I don't know why, she said, but I wanted to see it again before I go. Closure, I said. It's the family hobby. We walked through the cracked halls, the dust swirling around us like ghosts still deciding if they wanted to stay. In the study, she stopped, touching the old fireplace mantel. You think he'd be proud? Dad? She nodded. I thought for a moment. I think he'd finally understand us. She smiled faintly. Then I guess that's enough. The night before her flight, we stayed late in the workshop, like we used to when we were kids. Waiting for Dad to come home from a job. We didn't talk about logistics or plans. We just sat on the floor with wine. Surrounded by the hum of quiet tools and the scent of cedar. At one point, Ava said, you ever think Mom knew this would happen? That we'd both end up here, building her dream? Yeah, I said. She probably planned it from the start. She always said you were the builder and I was the spark, Ava said, resting her head on my shoulder. Guess it finally worked. Yeah, I whispered. Guess it did. The next morning, she was gone before sunrise. She left a note on my workbench, don't wait for the world to thank you. It already has, every time something you fixed keeps standing. I folded it carefully. Slid it between the letters on the wall. For the rest of the day, the workshop felt quieter, not empty, just paused. Like it was waiting for a new rhythm. Noah noticed. It's weird without her, he said. I nodded. That's how you know someone mattered. Weeks passed. We started receiving photos from Ava, sunlit classrooms in Florence, students learning to carve, laughing in front of old cathedrals. The caption under one photo read, different country, same sawdust. I pinned it to the corkboard in the office. Whenever apprentices asked who she was, I'd point to the photo and say, the better half of this operation. One evening, after everyone had left, I walked out back to the small courtyard behind the workshop. The air smelled of rain and varnish. I sat on the bench Ava and I built together years ago. The wood had darkened with age. But it was still solid, like most things built with love and patience. I looked up at the fading sky and whispered, you did it, sis. You took it further than I ever could. The wind rustled through the trees, soft and approving, like her laughter carried on air. That night, I locked up and turned off the lights one room at a time. The rocking chair creaked once in the dark, its familiar song, its patient rhythm. For years, I thought that sound meant the past refusing to die. Now I knew it was just a heartbeat. The sound of what remains. The next morning, Noah found me in the office, sketching a new sign design. "What's that?" he asked. "The Carver Workshop," I said. But with a subtitle. He squinted at the drawing. "Ava's Way, Florence," to whom he smiled. "She'll love it." "She already does," I said. Months later, when she called from Italy. The connection crackled but her voice was clear. "You kept the name?" she asked. "Of course," I said. "You earned it." "You sound different," she said. "Lighter. Guess I finally learned how to let things go without losing them." She laughed. "That's the trick, isn't it? Always was. Take care of our legacy. Liam." "I am," I said. "And so are you." When the call ended, I stood there for a while, listening to the faint hum of tools from the workshop below. The air smelled of life, of continuity, of everything still unfolding. For once, I wasn't afraid of time moving forward. It didn't feel like loss anymore. It felt like inheritance in motion. It had been 5 years since Ava left for Florence. 5 years since the workshop became a living heartbeat all its own, breathing. Growing, teaching without me needing to push it. In that time, the Carver Foundation expanded across continents. Ava sent updates from every city that smelled like old wood and sawdust. Her students called the technique the Carver method. The phrase made me laugh the first time I read it. I never thought quiet work could have a method. But now it had become a movement, a philosophy taught in classrooms, printed in books, whispered in studios by people who had never met me. And that was exactly how it should be. The invitation came one afternoon, tucked in with the week's mail. "You are invited to the opening gala of the Carver exhibition, Hands That Remember, a global retrospective. Venue, the Smithsonian. Date, the anniversary of our first workshop opening." I stared at it for a long time. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same museum that once wanted to immortalize me was now celebrating the work itself. No headlines. No scandal. Just legacy, in motion. Ava called that night. "So? Are you coming?" "Wouldn't miss it," I said. "Good. They want you to say a few words." "Absolutely not." She laughed. "You haven't changed." "Yes, I have," I said. "That's why I'm not speaking." The day of the exhibition, Washington, D.C. was wrapped in late spring sunlight. The museum steps were crowded with artists, students, reporters, and old friends. I kept to the edges, blending in among the visitors, no tux, no cameras, just a gray suit that let me disappear into the crowd. Inside, the atrium glowed with soft light. Each gallery was a story: Florence, Boston, Chicago, Kyoto, Lagos, Sao Paulo, cities that had taken pieces of our craft and made them their own. Everywhere I looked, I saw hands at work, photographs of artisans, sculptures, videos of students repairing forgotten heirlooms. None of them bore my face. And that was perfect. In the center of the exhibit stood a familiar object, Mom's rocking chair. The same one I'd refused to sell all those years ago. It sat beneath a single spotlight, polished and whole. Its plaque reading, "Restored 2025, on loan from the Carver Workshop, Connecticut. Stillness is the loudest sound." I smiled. No name. No, by Liam Carver. Just the message. That was my signature now, silence. As I stood there, a group of visitors gathered around the chair. One of them, a teenage boy, asked the guide, "So who made it?" The guide smiled. "It was restored by a craftsman named Liam Carver, many years ago. But if you ask the foundation, they'll tell you he was just the first pair of hands. Every student who's learned the method since is part of the same story." The boy nodded thoughtfully. "That's kind of beautiful." I turned slightly away, hiding my smile. It was more than beautiful. It was freedom. Later, I wandered into the section titled Legacy Through Learning. On one wall was a photo of Ava, standing in a sunlit studio, surrounded by young artists. She looked radiant. Older, confident. Beneath it, a quote, "My brother taught me that fixing things is how you make peace with time." For a moment, I had to steady myself. She'd found her way of saying goodbye without saying it at all. A curator approached me quietly, clipboard in hand. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said. I nodded. "It's something." "You sound like a craftsman," she said with a knowing smile. "Used to be," I said. "Funny," she said. "You sound like you still are." She walked off before I could answer, leaving me with a strange warmth in my chest, the kind that comes from being known without being recognized. When the formal speeches began, I stayed at the back. Ava took the stage, poised, confident, her voice echoing through the hall. Restoration isn't about making things look new. It's about remembering what they've survived. My brother once said, legacy isn't what you keep. It's what you fix before you're gone. I didn't understand it then. Now I live by it. Applause thundered through the room. I slipped away before it ended. Outside, the air was cool and still. The city lights shimmered across the reflecting pool. I sat on a low stone wall, listening to the faint echoes of celebration behind me. Ava joined me a few minutes later, heels in hand, hair loose from the stage lights. You didn't stay for the toast, she said. I'm not much for toasts. You are, however, impossible. Consistency is a virtue. She laughed softly. You proud of what we built? Proud's too small a word, I said. She looked out at the city. You know, people kept asking where you were tonight. Good, I said. Means the story's finally bigger than me. We sat in silence for a while, two carvers who had spent a lifetime learning how to be still. Then Ava said quietly, you think Mom and Dad would recognize us now? Maybe not, I said. But I think they'd recognize what we made of them. She smiled faintly. You still talk like an artist. I talk like someone who's finally finished the piece. We watched the night deepen, the noise of the gala fading into the distance. Eventually, Ava stood, kissed the top of my head, and said, you did good, big brother. Go inside, I said. They need you. She smiled. They'll always need you too. Not tonight. Maybe not, she said. But forever. After she went back in, I stayed a little longer. The air carried the smell of varnish and lilacs, strange, familiar, eternal. When I finally rose to leave, I looked back through the museum window. The rocking chair gleamed under the lights, motionless but alive. 1,000 stories, all born from that one moment of betrayal, now resting in quiet triumph. It was the same scene as years ago, an auction, a crowd, a gavel. But this time, no one sold anything. They just listened. And that was enough. As I stepped into the night, I whispered the same words I had the day everything began. The black sheep came home. Only now, the home wasn't a place. It was everything we'd fixed along the way. It's been more than a decade since the Carver siblings last stood on the same stage. The world moved forward, cities changed, skylines grew, new generations rose. But tucked between the hills of Connecticut, down a road half swallowed by maple trees, the Carver Restoration Workshop still breathed. Time had softened its edges. The brick was older, the sign sun-faded, but the smell, that comforting mix of pine, oil, and possibility, never changed. Inside, the place was alive with sound, chisels, laughter, the rhythmic hum of creation. And at the far end of the hall stood a girl named Maya. 17, shy but sharp, one of the newest apprentices. She'd arrived that morning with her father's broken violin, the last thing he'd owned before he passed. She didn't talk much, just listened. She reminded everyone of an old story they'd all grown up hearing. When she finished sanding the violin neck, she turned to the workshop curator, a gray-haired man named Samuel, once an apprentice himself under the old Carver program. Mr. Samuel, she asked. Who exactly was Liam Carver? The question made the man pause mid-motion, his hand resting on a stool that had survived longer than any of them. He smiled. It wasn't the first time he'd been asked, but he always answered it the same way. Liam Carver, he said softly, was the man who fixed what couldn't be sold. Maya tilted her head. Was he famous? Samuel chuckled. Not the kind you see on TV. He wasn't loud about what he did. He just kept showing up, long after everyone else stopped believing in broken things. He leaned on the bench, eyes distant but warm. They called him the Wolf once, back when the world thought silence meant defeat. But he turned that name into something else. Maya set down the violin. What happened to him? Samuel gestured toward the far wall. There, framed in glass, hung a few pieces, a weathered hammer, a folded letter, a simple bronze nameplate that read, and beside it, a photograph. Two siblings standing in front of the old estate, arms around each other, the sun rising behind them. Maya walked closer. That's him. That's them, Samuel corrected. Liam and Ava. She runs the foundation in Florence now. But everything you touch here, every tool, every piece of wood, carries both of them. He smiled faintly. You see, they built a legacy that doesn't shout. It listens. A bell rang from the front door, another visitor entering, the rhythm of life never pausing. Samuel picked up a small carving knife and handed it to her. Go on, he said. Finish your violin. It's what he'd have wanted. She smiled, holding the knife delicately. Was he a good teacher? The best kind, Samuel said. He taught without needing to be here. Hours later, when the others had gone, Samuel stayed behind to lock up. He walked through the quiet hall, lights dim, the scent of varnish and rain heavy in the air. He paused beside the rocking chair, the chair, now a permanent fixture under a skylight. The sunlight hit it just so, making the grain glow like gold veins in stone. He reached out, gave it the slightest push. It swayed once, then stilled, whispering its soft wooden sigh. He smiled. Every evening it did that, like the house itself remembering its first breath. Before turning off the lights, Samuel looked around the room one last time. The tables. The benches. The rows of tools hanging neatly on the wall. All of it alive, though the man who built it was long gone. He spoke into the silence. The way old craftsmen do when they know the walls are listening. Rest easy, Wolf. They're still learning. He flicked the switch. The next morning? Sunlight spilled through the windows again, landing on the walls, the tools, the wood, and finally, the plaque above the doorway. In honor of those who restore not for profit, but for peace. Beneath it, a second line had been added over the years. Legacy is the sound of something fixed still standing. Maya read it as she came in, setting her violin on the bench. Outside, the world was noisy and fast, but in here, time moved slower. She lifted her father's violin, sanded the edge once more, and smiled as the morning light caught the curve of the wood. At that exact moment, across the ocean, in a bright Florence studio, Ava Carver paused mid-lecture. She turned to the window, sunlight glinting off her glasses, a faint, familiar sound echoing through her memory, like the creak of a chair rocking once in still air. She smiled. "Keep it steady," she told her students. "That's how you honor the work." Back in Connecticut, the workshop doors stood open. The spring wind carrying the scent of wood and lilac through the air. From outside, you could hear the soft tapping of tools, the murmur of voices. The language of legacy continuing itself. And if you stood still long enough, you might almost hear it, a faint whisper between the trees,